49 years ago, a 22-year-old woman named Lena Farwell left the evening shift at a cannery in Harwick, Oregon, and walked toward her car in the gravel lot behind the building. And she never made it. She left behind a thermos of cold coffee on the passenger seat, a set of keys dangling from the driver's door lock, and a sweater folded on the hood that she had taken off in the warmth of the cannery and set there, meaning to put it back on. The lot was dark. It was October. Authorities at the time concluded she had likely left on her own. She was young, they noted, and young women sometimes made decisions that concerned their families. Her mother, a woman named Ruth Farwell, who had raised Lena and her two brothers alone on a dairy farm outside Harwick since 1961, did not accept that conclusion for a single hour. She remained certain, until the day she died, that someone had taken her daughter in that parking lot, and that the man responsible was still drawing breath somewhere in the world she was living in. For 43 years, she was right about both things. Then, in the spring of 2023, a retired schoolteacher in Boise, Idaho, a man who had never heard of Lena Farwell, never driven through Harwick, never had any reason to think his Dina mattered to anyone outside his own family, opened a box he'd ordered online, read the instructions, and spat into a small plastic tube. He had no idea what that tube was about to set in motion. But to understand why it mattered, and what it finally answered, you have to go back to Harwick first. Because you have to know who Lena was before you can understand what was taken. Harwick sat on the southern Oregon coast, a fishing and farming town of 3,800 people in 1974. The kind of place where the ocean announced itself before you could see it, and where the smell of salt and kelp and low tide was simply the smell of home if you had grown up there. The working waterfront ran 2 miles along the inlet, and the cannery at its eastern end had processed Dungeness crab and albacore tuna since 1938 and employed, at any given time, about 120 people, most of them from the same families that had worked it for 2 or 3 generations already. The town had one stoplight. The high school held a crab feed every spring that people planned their social calendar around. The diner on Anchor Street opened at 5 in the morning and closed when the owner felt like it, which was usually when the coffee ran low. Lena Farwell had worked at the cannery since she was 19, on the processing line, and then, by 1974, on quality control, a promotion she had earned by being the most precise and least distracted person on her shift. She lived in a rented room above the hardware store on Connell Street, 8 blocks from the cannery, close enough to walk in good weather, and close enough to walk in bad weather if you didn't mind getting wet. She was saving money toward a nursing certificate at the community college in Coos Bay. A plan she had been building toward methodically, the way she built toward everything. A little at a time, without announcing it, until it was close enough to touch. Her supervisor at the cannery, a man named Hector Rains, would tell investigators that Lena was the employee he most trusted to find a problem before it became one. She had the kind of attention, he said, that most people don't know how to teach. She was 22 years old that autumn. She had her mother's dark hair and her own particular way of laughing, soundlessly first, the shoulders shaking, and then the sound arriving a half-beat later, like she was always slightly surprised by what had struck her as funny. She drove a 1968 Datsun, the color of old mustard. She had a cat named Kettle that she was not technically allowed to keep in the rented room, but that the landlord had chosen to not notice. She called her mother on Sundays from the payphone on the corner of Connell and Main, because the hardware store's phone was locked after hours and she had not yet saved enough for her own. She had a library card, a subscription to a nursing trade magazine she had found at a used bookstore, and a jar on the windowsill where she kept her coin savings, counted and rolled every Sunday night. She was 3 months from having enough for her first semester's tuition. On the evening of October 11th, 1974, she finished her shift at 8:15 p.m. and said goodnight to 2 coworkers at the cannery's side door. One of them, a woman named Gloria Tesh, would later tell investigators that Lena had been in good spirits that evening. She had mentioned something funny that had happened on the line, and they had all 3 laughed about it for a minute before going their separate ways. Gloria had turned left toward the street. Lena had turned right toward the parking lot. Gloria did not look back. Lena's Datsun was found at 10:40 that night when a cannery supervisor, working late, noticed it still in the lot with the driver's door unlocked and the key in the lock, and thought someone must have forgotten something inside and come back for it. When he looked more closely, he found the sweater on the hood and the thermos on the seat, and he stood there in the cold October air and felt the particular feeling a person gets when something in a scene is wrong and they cannot yet name what it is. He went inside and called the Harwich Police Department. Lena was gone. The lead investigator assigned to the case was Detective Leonard Voss of the Harwich Police Department, a practical, deliberate man of 38 who had worked 14 years in a town where serious crime was unusual enough that he kept his skills sharp by attending state training programs on his own time. He arrived at the cannery lot before midnight on October 11th and spent 2 hours walking the gravel with a flashlight before the scene was processed. The lot had 1 working lamp at the far corner nearest the street. The area where Lena's Datsun was parked was in shadow. There were tire tracks in the gravel that could not be definitively attributed to any particular vehicle. In the first week, Voss interviewed 61 people. Every cannery worker who had been on shift that evening, everyone on Connell Street who might have seen anything between 8 and 10, every person whose name came up in any connection at all. He built a timeline that confirmed Lena had left the cannery side door at 8:15 p.m. and had never been seen again. He found no witnesses who had heard anything from the parking lot. The gravel had absorbed whatever had happened there. 2 persons of interest emerged in the first 10 days. The first was a man who had reportedly argued with Lena over a shift scheduling matter several weeks earlier, an argument described by witnesses as sharp but brief. He was interviewed, and his alibi, confirmed by 3 people, and a receipt from a bar 40 miles away, eliminated him within the week. The second person of interest was a man named Gerald Oates, 34 years old, who drove a delivery route that passed the cannery 3 evenings a week, and who had been identified by 2 separate witnesses as someone they had seen parked near the cannery lot on multiple prior occasions without apparent purpose. Oates was a Harwich native. He had grown up here. His father had worked the waterfront for 30 years. He coached the youth wrestling team at the IMCA on Saturday mornings and was known, according to everyone Voss spoke to, as a solid, dependable man. He was interviewed once, on October 19, 1974. He said he parked near the cannery sometimes on his break because the lot was quiet, and he used the time to eat his dinner and listen to the radio. He named the radio program. Voss confirmed it. There was no physical evidence connecting Oates to the scene, and no witness who had seen him there on the night in question. The interview was inconclusive. Voss filed it in the case report and noted, in his own handwriting in the margin, follow-up, opportunity pattern. Meanwhile, Ruth Farwell was on the phone every single day. She called the police department at 8 in the morning and asked for Detective Voss, and did not accept being transferred to anyone else. She organized a volunteer search that covered the coastal bluffs and forest roads within 10 miles of Harwich over 3 consecutive weekends in October and November, in weather that ranged from cold rain to genuine windstorm, and she was there for every hour of every day of it, in a yellow rain slicker that became, to everyone who participated, the image they carried of what refusing to give up looked like in practice. She printed 300 flyers with Lena's photograph and mailed them to every police department within 100 miles. She wrote a letter to the governor's office. She received a form reply. By the spring of 1975, the investigation had reached its outer edge. No new leads had emerged. The file remained open. Voss kept a copy on his desk. But the desk had other cases on it, and the other cases were also real, and the work of a small-town detective does not pause to accommodate the unresolved ones. Ruth Farwell did not accept that either, but she was a practical woman, and she understood the difference between what she could control and what she could not. She could not make the police find something that wasn't visible yet. She could keep looking herself, and she did. And she kept asking, every year, in every format available to her. She was not going to let Lena become a file in a drawer. By 1980, 6 years had passed. Gerald Oates had married a woman from Coos Bay named Patricia, and they had 2 children and a house on the west side of Harwick, where the lots ran large and the Douglas firs grew close to the back fence. He had left the delivery route and gone into business for himself, a small landscaping company that by the mid-'80s had enough steady clients to keep 3 employees busy through the summer months. He was a fixture at the IMCA. He coached wrestling for 11 years. His name appeared in the Harwick Courier when his daughter won a regional science fair prize, and again when his landscaping crew was hired to maintain the grounds at the new county library branch, and again when he was elected to a 3-year term on the Harwick Parks Board. He was a man who existed in his community as an asset. Reliable, present, the kind of person a town decides, without meaning to decide it, that they do not have to worry about. Leonard Voss retired from the Harwick Police Department in 1991. He had worked the Lena Farwell case for 17 years from a desk, and for the following years from a home office, where he kept a legal pad with his notes and a photocopy of the case file in a manila folder rubber banded to a box of old case files that his wife had asked him, twice, whether he could donate somewhere. He had said no, politely, both times. Ruth Farwell was still calling. By 1991, she was calling the department every October, on the anniversary, and sometimes in March, which had been Lena's birth month, and she was still asking the same question in different words, which was, is anyone still looking? The answer, technically, was yes. The file was open. The case was assigned, but the detective who knew it best had retired, and the detective who inherited it was doing his best with caseloads that had grown and resources that had not. By 1995, the coin jar that had sat on Lena's windowsill, retrieved from her rented room in 1974 and returned to Ruth, was on the mantel of Ruth's farmhouse, where it had been since the day she brought it home. The coins inside were from 1974. Ruth had not touched them. She kept them the way she kept everything associated with Lena, exactly as they were, because to rearrange them would have meant accepting a kind of finality she was not prepared to accept. Lena's cat, Kettle, had lived out his full life at the farmhouse, dying peacefully in 1987, at an impressive age for a cat of his temperament. Ruth had buried him near the fence line where the dairy cows used to graze, and she had cried more than she expected to. And then she had understood why. It was the last living thing that had belonged to Lena. And now that was gone too. And the world kept asking her to let go of things she was not done holding. She held on anyway. This channel exists because cases like Lena's deserve someone who won't let go either. If you want us to keep telling these stories, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from. And now, let's get back to Harwick and to the retired school teacher in Boise, who changed everything without knowing it. His name was Franklin Dubose. He was 68 years old in the spring of 2023, a retired middle school history teacher who had spent 31 years in the Boise School District and who had ordered a consumer DNA kit as a birthday gift to himself, motivated by a vague curiosity about his family's origins that had been building since he watched a documentary about genealogy the previous winter. He swabbed his cheek, sealed the kit, mailed it back, and forgot about it for 6 weeks until the results arrived in his email. He uploaded them to a public ancestry database that same evening. He was interested in his grandmother's side. There was a family story about Cherokee heritage that had never been confirmed, and he spent most of that first evening exploring the genetic ancestry breakdown on the site's dashboard. He noted the cousin matches that appeared. He did not recognize most of the names. He was not thinking about Oregon. He had never been to Harwick. He had no connection, by name or by knowledge, to anything that had happened in a gravel parking lot on October 11, 1974. Detective Sergeant Miriam Daly of the Oregon State Police Cold Case Unit had submitted a DNA profile extracted from trace biological material recovered from Lena Farwell's sweater, the one found folded on the hood of the Datsun, to a forensic genealogy lab in January of 2023. The sample had sat in the State Evidence Archive for 49 years, cataloged and preserved but unprocessable by the technology of the time it was collected. The forensic genealogy method works by uploading an unknown DNA profile to public ancestry databases and using the partial genetic matches of strangers, people who share small percentages of DNA with an unknown contributor, to triangulate that contributor's identity through their family connections. It is painstaking work. It can take months. And it requires, at the right moment, someone who happens to share enough genetic material with the person you are looking for and has happened to upload their results to the right database. Franklin Dubose uploaded his results in April of 2023. By May, Daly's lab had flagged his profile as a significant match. Not a close relative of the unknown contributor, but close enough to establish a branch. By July, working outward through public records and the genealogical database, the lab had mapped a family tree that pointed to a specific family line in Clatsop and Coos counties, Oregon. By August, the family line had narrowed to a single candidate: Gerald Oates. On the morning of August 14, 2023, Miriam Daly was at her desk in Salem with the genealogy report on one side of her desk and a photocopy of Leonard Voss's original 1974 case notes on the other. She read the margin note in Voss's handwriting, follow-up, opportunity pattern, and she read the name it was written beside, and she sat with that for a moment. Gerald Oates had been in the file for 49 years. He had been interviewed once, briefly, on October 19, 1974, and not followed up with. And now his name was appearing again, from a completely different direction, built out of a stranger's DNA and a genealogy database that had not existed when Leonard Voss was writing his notes in longhand. She picked up the phone and called her supervisor. "I need a surveillance authorization," she said. "Tonight if possible." Gerald Oates was 73 years old in the autumn of 2023. He had retired from the landscaping business in 2015 and spent his days gardening, volunteering 2 mornings a week at the food bank on Anchor Street, and attending the Wednesday evening service at Harwick Community Church, where he had been a member for 31 years. His wife Patricia had died of cancer in 2019. His son lived in Portland. His daughter, the one who had won the science fair, was a veterinarian in Eugene. He was, by every visible measure, a grandfather-aged man living out a quiet retirement in the town where he had spent his entire life, The state police obtained a DNA sample from a water bottle Oates had discarded at the Harwick Community Center during a food bank shift in September of 2023. The sample was processed in 11 days. It matched the profile from Lena Farwell's sweater. The statistical certainty was greater than 1 in 800 billion. Daly drove to Harwick herself to make the arrest. On the morning of October 3, 2023, 49 years and 8 days after Lena Farwell had walked out of the cannery's side door. 2 Harwick police officers accompanied her. Oates was in his front yard when they arrived, trimming the hedge along the sidewalk with a pair of hand shears in a fleece jacket in the October morning light. He looked up when the car stopped. He watched Daly cross the lawn toward him. He set down the shears on the grass with great deliberateness, the way a man puts down something he understands he will not be picking up again. He did not speak. He put his hands out. He let them be cuffed without a word, and he was quiet during the entire drive to the county facility. And he did not ask questions. And he did not look out the window. He was charged with murder in the first degree. The people of Harwick, who had known Gerald Oates for the entirety of their lives, who had watched him coach their children at the Yimka, who had hired him to lay their garden beds, who had sat beside him in church pews for 3 decades, spent several days in the particular silence that follows the collapse of a long-held certainty. Then the silence broke, and what came after it was not quiet. A woman who had worked alongside Lena at the cannery in 1974 and had attended the same church as Oates for 20 years told the Harwick Courier that she had not slept the first night after the arrest. "I kept thinking about how many times I'd sat near him," she said. "And the whole time. The district attorney announced in February of 2024 that Gerald Oates, citing his age and a diagnosis of early-stage congestive heart failure, had entered a plea agreement, guilty to murder in the second degree, with a sentence of 20 years, effectively a life sentence at 73. He offered no statement. He showed no visible emotion at sentencing. The judge, before announcing the sentence, said that she wanted the record to reflect that 49 years was not an abstraction. "It is the length of a life," she said. "It is time that belonged to someone else." Ruth Farwell died in 2018, at the age of 86, on the dairy farm outside Harwick, where she had raised her children and kept her vigil. She did not live to hear the answer. Her son Michael, Lena's younger brother, who was 9 years old when Lena disappeared, and who was 58 when Gerald Oates was arrested, was in the courtroom at sentencing, in the second row, with his wife beside him. He had driven from Portland the night before and had not slept much. When the judge finished, Michael sat for a moment without moving. Then, he reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and took out a photograph, not a copy, the original, soft at the corners from years of handling, and he held it in both hands and looked at it for a long time. It was Lena, at a company picnic somewhere, standing in sunlight with her arms crossed, laughing at something off camera. The soundless laugh first, shoulders already shaking, the actual sound arriving a beat later. He put the photograph back in his pocket. He stood up. He walked out of that courtroom and into the October morning, and he stood on the sidewalk and breathed for a while. And then he called his daughter, who was waiting for the call, and he told her that it was done, and that it had taken 49 years, and that her great-aunt's name was Lena, and that Lena had been planning on a nursing certificate, and that she had a coin jar on her windowsill and a cat named Kettle, and a way of laughing that arrived a half-beat late, and that none of that had been forgotten. Not once. Not for a single year. What lingers in a case like this, and it should linger, is a set of questions that have no clean answers. What does justice mean when the man responsible lived out his full life? Married, built a business, raised children, coached other people's children, and died of natural causes, having never faced the consequence of what he did. Does a late arrest, a guilty plea, a judge's statement change that calculus? What does it mean that the thing that finally cracked this open was not a detective, not a witness, not a confession, but a retired schoolteacher in Idaho who ordered a kit out of mild curiosity and spit into a tube on a Tuesday night? And how many other cases are sitting in evidence archives right now, waiting for the right stranger to decide they want to know where their grandmother's family came from? Justice found Lena Farwell after 49 years. It came late. It came at all. Those two facts sit side by side, and neither one cancels the other out. If you believe that finding the truth is worth the work, however long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More stories are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.